Hello. I know I said I maybe won't record anymore, but I just really really can't help it but make another video hating on women. So, this is my observations on female psychology and a few things that get lost or get misinterpreted in when people fail to project things to genders. So, I will start by so first of all, I want to explain, or the key thing I want to kind of outline here is how mm, uh, I will refer to them as men as women, but really feminine men, or technically will behave like women, and same is true for super masculine women, though that is much harder to achieve than a really feminine man. Or it's like way rarer. So I will use the word men and women, but I actually mean um, feminine, masculine, right? Just for the sake of, I don't know, ease of use, I guess. And I've noticed this thing through speaking to a lot of women and asking them their like, or interpreting their kind of thought patterns and the kind of stereotypical, like, um, not even stereotypical, just typical. It's not stereotypical, it's just typical. Almost every single woman I've interacted with has takes that go something along the lines of, I want respect. And it then is followed with, um, I feel like doing XXX doesn't give me respect. Or, how should I say? Okay, I will start here and maybe okay, I'll start here. So generally, not just women, men and women generally prefer being respected than not being respected. If we go back to the, like humans or animals take that I had, which is, the more respect you command, the more authority you have, the better secured, the more expressive you can be. So, of course, we want respect. It is a useful tool to us. And there's nothing wrong with this. There are some differences. The difference occur with how you try to get that respect, by which means you try to attain it, and how you even interpret what it is. Yes, we all want it. We all want a high social ranking, but there is a difference in how people think that high social ranking is attained. Like, they don't understand what the actual precursor to respect is. So they don't understand what the recipe for respect is. If so, the analogy would be you want to make an apple pie, and to make an apple pie, you need apples. And without apples, it's not an apple pie. And with respect, it's kind of the same thing. There are certain precursors, ingredients that make something worthy of respect. Um, Regardless of which society or environment you exist in, there are certain things that almost like on an evolutionary level, we kind of had to evolve to respect. Otherwise, those groups probably breeded less and died out because they didn't respect certain things, right? Um, and when you're trying to make apple pie and you don't realize that it requires apples, like that part hasn't connected with, you're going to have a really hard time. It's going to be very confusing and it's going to be very difficult. Um, and I feel like from female perspective, trying to earn respect is like trying to uh how should I say, for some reason they at some point got trained that apples are bad thing and they shouldn't be used, and they're trying to make an apple pie without putting in any apples. And they find all the flavorings, they find all the substitutes, they find all the alternatives, and they make a very presentable apple pie-ish like product, but essentially it's not an apple pie, and it will never compare to a real apple pie, even if it may pose as such. And that comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of what is the trigger for respect. And okay, then you ask me, okay, then what is this misunderstanding? And first I will explain how the patriarchy, how the men uh, view respect. And respect is attained by demonstrating your value, um, but specifically by not by the act of demonstrating your value, but by the fact that you have value, which is why we someone who doesn't show off and someone who's very like quiet or very uh doesn't pose as much, but we know is very competent, naturally um makes us want to respect them more so than if they were always calling in and showing off and always rubbing it in your face. That would make you respect them less. So it's not the act of posing and showing that you're competent, it's the act of it's the property or the quality of being competent and having value um, that calls for respect. So it's not about advertising your products if you're selling some shit. It's about having a great product, right? This is an important distinction that we'll get back to later. And so, and what are the things that we um, value? It's gonna be anything that displays competence, anything that displays ability to improve quality of life, ability to help people, ability to construct something meaningful, or even power. Strength itself calls for respect. Any form of power, any form of ability or value. I'm not gonna go over value too deep, um, but specifically tangible things that can offer you a value. So, for example, let's say you're walking down the street at night and you know your friend is very good fighter. That is value. Not that he once went on a TV show making himself look like a great fighter, but he's just an actor who doesn't know what he's doing. That is displayed value, but a lack of real value, right? Um, well, to some extent, you could also argue if they're famous, that could be in some situations a form of value, but it's still how I should say it's only because there's an illusion of value. If you saw like the reason why we respect famous people is because a lot of us have this belief that um, those people actually have value. If you were to meet, it's like a never meet your idols. Where does that come from? When you meet them, a lot of the time you realize that they are just like the rest of us, and they got elevated by marketing and media. And when you realize that, you lose your respect for them because you realize you got lied to, right? And one sec, okay, and that's why that's significant. That's why, okay, I think I've explained that. So men generally are able to um, get respect through, like, to us, how we try to attain respect. There is a pretty clear path and a pretty clear instructions. Become as competent as you can, become as strong and useful as you can, and um, that will draw in respect. And staying still within the realm of men, there are people that see this and are like, that is too much effort to build your competencies up. I would prefer to pose and get respect by. And that only works because of the society that we live in right now. It is so forgiving and is so um how I should say difficult to verify a lot of things. Previously, you would go out to hunt and you would literally see who is good at hunting by their direct impact. Now you could work at a tech firm and be like, I'm a coder, look how much I earn, 200K. That says nothing about your level of competence. You could be making 400K, a million per year, and still be just as competent as someone earning 40K in Europe. It says nothing to your level of competence, the level of compensation you get because of the society we have created where it is difficult to assess and a lot of shit. Um, a lot of time you're just like some superficial things are able to um, a lot easier pose as ways to get respect. For example, like um, and this is super noticeable in fields where there are supposed to be experts or analysts, or like for example, that is one of the main issues with medicine and a lot of scientific research. Yes, you can go to a medical school, you can study very hard, and you can graduate, and then you will become you will be one of the people in the medical profession, or you might become a researcher or something, right? That's very cool. The fact that you got to that stage does speak to your ability to maybe pass some tests within the educational environment, or your ability to hire someone else to do those tests for you, or um, some other way, right? Um, or as I noticed, this was an actual thing when I was at university, when there was exams, people would get together and think how to cheat, and we'd have like group chats and shit, whatever. Um, there are many ways that you can get just past the system without even having that level of competence. And that level of competence on its own, even if you were studying perfectly, does not mean you're going to be a good doctor. It does not mean you're going to make um, good experiments for your research. It does not mean that you're going to come to accurate conclusions. That does not, your ability to succeed within that system does not necessarily mean that you are going to um, be capable at the profession. It's just like the minimum like mark to get through because of regulations, right? And a lot of the time people will be like, "Oh, doctor said this. That means this must be true." Yeah, and there's millions of doctors, and they all say different things because they have varying levels of comprehension and competency, and most of them are going to be wrong. So, this is another typical example of um, how our society kind of enables incompetent people to appear trustworthy, to appear competent, to appear as though they deserve respect, just because of the way our society is like structured, right? Previously, life was just too difficult to allow for this level of um, I don't even know, like this level of ability to like mimic competence, like mimicry. Like life was just too hard to allow mimicry. I mean, there were still some retarded things like, oh, I'm a witch doctor. The survival success rate, like at 5%, right? So in a way, even in the medieval times, that shit was present. Um, it was just less. Um, People were more in touch with the results because they really needed those results, and there was a much less margin for error, right? Like, imagine you're in a tribe, and then someone proposes like a new, I don't know, way of healing wounds or some shit. Like, you see immediately how it works. And then, from here on, it's like, okay, then I do this. You're not gonna sit there and be like, well, technically, this tribesman is less educated than this tribesman, therefore he doesn't have the, and this educated one says that this is invalid. No, you're just gonna look at the results, and based off the results, you're going to um, judge for yourself. It's just as things get bloated, it becomes much harder to see how certain ideas and certain methods lead to certain results, right? So that was a very detailed, very clear, and I would like to say simple um, explanation for um, respect and where it originates from and why it's becoming harder to stick to this original core uh, ingredient or component of respect. Neither is if you wanted to mimic uh, competence, you have way more tools to do so. You have social media that can very easily give one impression of you, which might be complete polar opposite of reality. Um, you have so many tools to do so. Like work reference. Oh, just set that to my phone, to the phone number of my mate, and I'm gonna win that job over because my mate is gonna find a really good way of mate as in a friend, um, will find a good way of, uh, you know, making me sound super competent, and someone else who might actually be more competent than me, applying for the same position, might lose out on the job because the level of competence you projected is going to be higher. And it creates an incentive to begin mimicking from a very young age because, uh, at least for me, this is like a very distinct something I've noticed. It's like you get more rewarded for mimicking um, compared to the amount of effort you put in. This is just blatantly true. There's just it's the cost to reward ratio is just fucked. It is much easier to mimic competence and then than to actually attain it. Okay, I'm a little bit dragging on the point. So I've explained respect. I've explained what the apples are in the apple pie for the respect. It's competence. And what is the problem with how females view respect? Okay, actually, I want to add another thing. When males interact with one another, there are going to be some mimics, um, but they're generally what kind of forms is the ones that are most competent are going to take the most dominant positions. They are going to be the ones that people go to like make decisions. They essentially become leaders, right? And you see this, I don't know, like military or some shit. Like that would be an example. Or let's say you are all you're working at a construction site. You might have a guy who's been working there for years and he knows all of the, methods and approaches. There is a clear hierarchy and it's based on competence and it's based on um well, that's literally it. And in that sense, we as men, we don't mind being submissive or giving respect to people that are more competent than us. We're completely fine with that. If someone is better than me, I give him respect for that. I'm not going to withhold respect. I'm not going to have an issue with um, them being dominant. I would prefer that they're dominant over anyone else because if they are dominant and they actually know how to get the results because they have the highest level of competence, then we're gonna get shit done. And we're gonna get shit done with the least amount of effort and with good leadership, um, we're gonna succeed as a collective, right? And that means everybody wins. If we were to uh, promote people that are low competence, then everybody loses. Um, except for that one individual. It's kind of like I don't know. It's kind of like Among Us or something, right? And so in that sense, hierarchies and and structure of dominance and submissiveness, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, and men have no issue with accepting that, right? And then come women, and women they view respect a little bit differently, and the core difference to how women try to attain respect is first of all, I'll start with not even how they attain respect. I'll start with for I think this is a super destructive idea from feminism where females or women have come to this amazing revelation that being submissive to someone is an inherently bad thing because oh it lowers my value, therefore I am going to therefore I have less expressiveness on the world, therefore I have uh, less capabilities, therefore I'm going to die sooner. And back to our animal instincts, they're like, oh my god, that's so bad, I mustn't allow this, right? And that's the conclusion they come to. Like, I must be equal or more dominant to men. right? And that is a very common idea. I have yet to see a female that I've spoke to for super extended period of time and actually assessed their psychology that didn't think this way. So this is the absolute default setting for like westernized, even though I wasn't even talking just to westernized, fucking Asians too. And it's kind of the same thing. Modern women have this belief that submission equals bad because less forms of um, expression. And I mean, they are correct that being submissive does mean you're less expressive. If I accept someone to be my boss, then it's kind of like saying your voice is more important than mine. I allow you to make decisions, but it doesn't mean that that's a bad thing because I promote competent people so that they can be able to make decisions that benefit the whole collective. So by me promoting that person, I also prevent someone incompetent from getting promoted. And as a collective, and me personally, um, I benefit from this, right? So there's um, this kind of idea that being submissive is inherently negative, and um, there's something inherently wrong with that. And then you go like, okay, why do women think this way? Why is every single woman, um, or typical modern women, obsessed with this idea of um, becoming dominant or fighting for dominance, right? And here comes a kind of um, where do I go here? Mm, there's a few angles. I just don't know which one to go in. Like, what would make better sense logically, like in what order to go. I guess I'll just go with a random one, and maybe I'll rearrange it if I need to. So the reason, well, one of them, the super obvious one, is like they just fail to realize that it's better for the collective to let competent people decide. That would be like the super superficial, the super oversimplified answer, and maybe to some extent it might be even accurate, right? It's like what's the idea of feminism? It always starts there was a patriarchy and we were unfairly compensated for our level of competence. First of all, that creates an implication that women even had the competence, which from a biological perspective they're at a severe disadvantage. Women are not as disposed to competence as men are biologically when it comes to certain tasks. Okay, I know exactly where I'm gonna go here. Um, there are different things that go into your level of competence, right? And there are different metrics that are more relevant to men, and there are things that are more relevant to women. So, for example, if we were to evaluate the ability to birth children, you could argue that men are tremendously incompetent in this field of competence that is very significant. And then you could, if that was the sole metric, then you could say women are way more competent than men at birthing. And in that sense, yes, women are completely dominant in that field. 100% of births were made by women. You're extremely dominant in that field of competence, right? In that angle of competence. And I have no problem admitting that. I'm not gonna contest you with, well, men can birth. Also, no, I would, uh, without any reluctance, uh, hand over the medal for birthing two women, right? That doesn't offend me. That doesn't lower my value as a human. Admitting the competence of another. In fact, I'm glad that you guys are so competent at it. If I like, it, it's something to be admired, right? It's a thing that presents value, right? So there are things that women are more predisposed to, and there are things that men are more predisposed to. So when it comes to like high high pressure, high stress, competitive environments, men dominate there, right? And then comes this like, oh, men and women are the same. They're not the same. Biologically, you're at a severe disadvantage that if you were to put a woman and she was to be like top 1 percentile talented, within women population, and then you're to take men top 1 percentile talented within men population, and you were to make them do exactly the same thing with the same amount of effort and the same amount of resources, men will dominate. If that thing that they're competing in is like a high stress, high performance, um, competitive environment, men will just dominate because of our biology. It's like how how much does a woman need to lift to get the physique um of a man? Do you understand? Like, but there are just biological differences, and they are the same how a man. It doesn't matter what he will do. He can't give birth to a fucking child, right? So we as men, we don't seem to have a problem of accepting um this biological difference, and for some reason modern like ideas, especially feminist ideas, fail to accept uh that women also have their disadvantages. Like, hello, you have fucking periods which last for a quarter of your life, as in while you're still in that period, which is going to be like half of your life, let's say. Um, uh, well, maybe like a third of your life. I don't know, depending what life expectancy. It's gonna last a few years, and within those years, you're still gonna have your menstrual cycle, and that menstrual cycle is pretty fucking distracting. Yeah, it is. Like, imagine if I'm in a wrestling match with someone, and then the entire like my uterus starts fucking contracting and shit. How am I supposed to compete with someone else given that biological factor? Right? I'm going to be at a severe disadvantage, even if we look at not just biological things like levels of testosterone, blah blah blah. If we just look just at like super basic thing like menstrual cycle and just the amount of volume, um, like the how that will affect my volume of training. Even from that, like imagine you were to take top 1% man and another top 1% man, and then you were to say one of them has 25% less time to um, train. Like, of course, the first one who's unrestricted is going to dominate, right? It's just like to argue with these points. I just don't see how you would even argue here. Like, there is no argument against this. That doesn't just like go like way over the realms of like complete delusion. Like so far, everything that I've said is like within the realms of like super basic, super simple ideas. And I would say even modern takes, a lot of them would already conflict with what I've said. And I've only said the like basic facts, right? that just goes to speak to how like deluded a lot of our modern takes are. Okay, so there are biological differences, and there are sex-specific dispositions and um, yeah, sex-specific dispositions in terms of competence, right? And here lies a situation where um, there is a kind of asymmetry in what things are competent, right? Or in what things are make up the competence, right? Of each sex. And okay, um, the, and here's the kind of nuanced take. I think this idea of feminism actually harms women more than it harms men because this idea of feminism where you try to compete for competence within fields that men have dispositions within. So if imagine let's do the opposite. Let's do the uh meninism or whatever, right? Let's go that route, right? And I was going to say women have had this matriarchy in certain skills like birthing people. Now all men are going to come together and we are going to compete with women in birthing people. Like first of all, we're not going to win. We're just not. And second of all, to even do that, to even go in that direction is extremely would be extremely harmful to men. Like imagine you're a young teenager and for some reason there's like super radical ideas are being told to you. You need to birth someone, and that's what how you would prove to the world that you're worth something. If I, as a young man, was to base my value on something that I cannot really attain, first of all, I'm going to fail, and then as a result of that failure, I'm gonna be like I'm gonna fail, and because of that, my own level of value will drop because I spent it doing something that doesn't like yield to me. It doesn't matter how much I try to birth a child, that won't really ever yield to me. So why try to do something that I just have a complete lack of a disposition to? And doing so will actually harm my life because that energy could have went into doing something else, right? So this idea that women can compete with men in fields that men have disposition to only harms, well, it harms everyone, but it especially harms women because you're going to spend your whole life proving something that is just false. Like, I could spend my whole life trying to prove to women that I can birth someone, but truth or reality won't be on my side, and hence it will be a massive waste of my resources, and I won't get anywhere. So, this idea of feminism is super destructive to women. And because it places value into things that men are competent at. If feminism movement looked more like let's prove our worth, girlies, by doing feminine things and not going into the realm of masculine competition, then yeah, it would be a very positive, productive movement for women and men. But it's because you try to leave the realm of feminine disposition and go into realms that yield more to men, you get a massive. Well, that is what creates all the issues. And I'm not saying that you can't do those things. Uh, it's just that you shouldn't expect to get the same level of return, and you shouldn't because you're going to be disappointed. And I think that's all, actually. Like, there's nothing wrong with like women in chess, women in sports. Go do your thing. Um, it just would be very underwhelming to use that as your sole like metric of value because you're never going to be able to rival someone who just has a disposition to it biologically. Okay, so I've covered that and this point that I've just unraveled about that um kind of ties into the next point, which is women don't like the idea of being submissive in things that men are more competent in. And in doing so, they're like chasing the ball in that kind of field, but instead of that, they're not claiming as much competence in the fields they do have dominance and domain over. In a sense, feminism isn't about womanhood, it's about trying to make men out of women. And our technology hasn't caught up to that. We can't make fully fleshed, real, like uncompromised men out of women. Like maybe in like 100 years, you gotta wait up or something. Maybe that would be possible. You could do like a real, like on a biological level, sex change. Right. No, you can, but I mean, it's just you're gonna you're gonna be like a parody of that person in the sense that yes, you can take the estrogen or you can take testosterone, you can do hormonal treatment, transitioning, but the issue is what you're left with isn't. It's still never going to match to like an organic man. It just can't. Like our levels of technology are just not that good yet. It's just the reality on this. Y- And so any form of sex change will always mean to lowering of your potential because you end up like overall because you end up with this like compromising on your strengths of your initial sex to trade them for a lesser version of the opposite sex, which creates the situation where there is no overall benefit from transitioning. You always lose. You just overall, it's like a lose every single time game. And like in terms of overall value, maybe you prefer playing the opposite like gender's game more, and that's more appealing to you. That is fine. Go have fun. But it comes at a cost. There's like overhead associated with transitioning, and you're paying that with your potential. And maybe you won't like be able to reach that limit, but it might be more interesting for you to play that, reduced version, let's say. That and that's fine. Go do that. Just realize the cost, right? You can't Okay, I'm moving from the topic. Um, I think I've made all points super clearly and super coherently. If I were to put this in a very like stereotypical, uh, almost misogynist sounding way, I could say, "Know your place, women." But that applies to both sexes, except for some reason, men don't really have an issue knowing our place. It's the women in modern day world that seem to be lost, or more so than men. I don't know. I think everyone is lost actually in modern world. It's just men get lost in slightly different way. I mean, I you could even argue that men are actually technically doing the same way thing, but I'm not gonna go into detail explaining why. Maybe another day. Actually, yeah, I would say men are also doing the same thing. A lot of them. But okay, I've explained that. There's nothing wrong with taking a more submissive position in fields where you or in situations where you okay, I think this will be the final point that I wanted to make, that I thought about as I was, walking. The final point is same how with men there are, imposters, there are mimics, there are people that try to mimic competence. With women that are trying to compete with men in the realm that is completely predisposed to men, almost all women are basically forced to mimic competence to be able to keep up. Um, let me say that again, but in a different way. I want to break down the mimic. Even like, let's say male mimics. Like, why do you even go to mimic in the first place? Like, let's break down. Like, I'm a mimic. Why do I want to mimic? I want to mimic because I want a certain degree of respect or response, but I don't have the competence to get it. And then you could say, well, okay, then why don't you go and get the competence? And then the mimic's answer is going to be either it's not worth it or I don't believe that I can. And what you will find with a lot of mimics is a very deep insecurity about their own ability. They realize that they will never, or they kind of look at the levels of competition and they just give up. They're like, I am not built for this. I can't do this. And instead, they resign to feigning or uh, mimicking competence because they realize that real competence is unattainable to them. That's how they perceive it. They can't think in long term, like if I really worked and worked and worked, maybe I could be able to do it. Generally, they either don't believe that they'll even be able to attain it after long-term competence or long-term effort, or they don't even think about long-term, like they're not able to project that far ahead. Therefore, they can't even imagine what it would be like to get competence in the first place, right? So, in simple words, mimicry is a byproduct of inferiority or perceived inferiority. And women resort to mimicry, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, because they feel their inferiority in those fields that they try to compete with men. That is why you guys are so vocal. That's why you try to uh, so hard to convince and win the approval of people around you. For example, what I've noticed with every single woman that I've spoken with, for extended period of time, is every single one of them tried to convince me that she wasn't who she actually was. Every single one of them was like, I am not like the other women. I am special. I am different. And just have a guess how many of them were actually special and how much of that was true. Zero. Like, I don't even understand why the fuck they were trying to convince me over that. Maybe someone could fill me in. Am I like is this like I don't know if that's even something special to me or just like all women are like programmed to try to win over the respect of fucking every single entity that they come into contact with. Because I for sure don't do this. And other men also don't. At least not that I'm aware of. Maybe I'm just like I don't know. I don't know why they care about my approval that much. Like what is it gonna change? Like, oh my god, I think you're so competent. Wow, in this man-dominated field, you've really convinced me that women really can uh do these things. Wow, women really are the superior gender because you can also birth people. Wow, you're more versatile. Like, what is that gonna give you? I think maybe they want some like conversational clout, but then we come back to the same issue of what happens if we let incompetent people uh, be raised to a higher position than what they're worth? Then the whole collective suffers. If we allow mimicry to occur, the whole collective suffers. Um, I kind of want to end it on a like a slightly more positive note, or not a more positive, a more like neutral uh direction, which is I think feminism undermines the strengths of women, and we should, if there is any form of like issue with respect and women aren't able to get respect, the way I would tackle this issue is we should address and fight narratives that devalue women for being feminine. We should instead um, learn to embrace gender specific traits instead of trying to shun men out of being masculine and try to shun women out of being feminine. It just creates a super repulsive environment. Like just in general, it feels very shit to grow in such an environment. It's like on a human level, it's really repulsive to exist in such an environment. Where as a man you're supposed to be feminine and whereas a woman you're supposed to be masculine. Like what the fuck is that? Right? And okay, and this will be the kind of shizo take, maybe the least logical part of this whole video. And this is like my own personal opinion, which might um I might go back on later. I'm still not sure. It's one of those like mm, but it's something I kind of believe on right now. And I do believe that everyone benefits from having both masculine and feminine traits. Generally, I prefer hybrid people. If you were to go extremely feminine or extremely masculine, like this idea of like just reject the opposite sexes kind of like vectors of growth, you get a super unappealing also environment because you get hard-headed men that aren't able of capable of adapting, and you get super retarded women that are like way too adaptive in a sense that they're just like social chameleons. You know, like they don't even bother. Like they're just like mass mimicking super hard. You know, and I think that both genders do benefit from attaining the opposite gender's traits. For example, a super hard-headed man could benefit from learning how to be more adaptive without compromising his initial strengths, without compromising his manhood. Those seem like they're opposite, but they're not. They are opposites, but they can be combined together to create something very powerful. And I think the same applies to women. Yes, uh, I like, in a sense, I kind of like the idea of feminism long term in the fact that women are adopting masculine traits, uh, but actually try to adopt the masculine traits instead of mimicking, uh, and try to adopt them without trying to mimic competence, and don't reduce yourself only to masculine traits. Like try to do so without compromising your feminine traits. And I think in the long run, this kind of like more hybrid combination of the two traits will actually produce much more valuable or competent or worthy of respect humans for both sexes. So, um, I'm not saying just completely like close in and just women only should be in the kitchen or whatever the fuck. Like, I do want you to go out and be in those masculine and work in that on your masculine skills or masculine abilities, but don't compromise on your feminine ones. And you don't have to. It is difficult. I do admit it is difficult, and it seems counterintuitive, but I do think it's possible. That is my personal take, right? Okay, I think I've made all of my points. I think I actually popped off. I think it was super clear to understand. It is 1 hour long, but I think I delivered all the points relatively relatively quickly. I don't think anyone else has captured it as precisely as I have. I'm just self-flattering, but I generally think that is true. Like for you to get this level of insight, like how many insights podcasts you would need to watch from like male or female or whatever. Like infinity. You will never get this level of insight anywhere else, I feel. I don't know how many books you'll need to read. So 1 hour, I would say, for this specific problem is actually really concise. So yeah, goodbye.